Thank you so much, Christian. That was so kind. And thank you all for turning up. I know it's kind of awkward to have to go back and forth, but I hope everyone can see the slides. We'll have some time after for questions, I hope, and discussion if anyone has any. So Beyond Words, Illuminated Manuscripts in Boston Collections is actually one exhibit in 3 parts, as Christian said. A story of 1,000 years told in 3 chapters. Part 1 at Harvard's Houghton Library introduces our epic tale with books made by and for monks in the early Middle Ages from the 7th through the 13th centuries. Here at the McMullen Museum, the Gothic plot thickens with beautiful gilded books for nobles. And at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, we read the last chapter of the story in the Renaissance book. In addition to following the development of books and reading and art in Europe over the course of a millennium, no big deal, my co-curators and I wanted to tell the story of how these books crossed the Atlantic and made their way to Boston, introducing you to some of the characters through whose hands they passed in their early modern journeys and transformations. You will meet several of these characters upstairs. If you look closely and examine the evidence left by those many hands over the centuries, you will discover that these books have amazing post-medieval stories to tell. I'm going to spin one such tale today, a story of church and mansion, industrialist and capitalist, destruction and dissemination, and finally, digital redemption. Our story begins on May 4th, 1926, when a beautiful late 13th century French manuscript was sold by Sotheby's London. According to the catalog, the manuscript was the 3rd volume of a missal for the use of Beauvais, with 309 leaves and 4 skillfully painted historiated initials, 2 of which were illustrated in the catalog. The manuscript had 35 large initials in gold and colors, with bar-patterned marginal extensions running the length of the page. It was bound in Russian leather with brass catches and clasps, metal studs along the board edges, the edges of the leaves gilt-tooled with Missal de Beauvais au pointellet on the lower edge of the bookblock. The catalog transcribed an early inscription written on the originally blank first recto, recording that the manuscript had been given by a canon to the Cathedral of Beauvais. Because of the association with the cathedral, the manuscript is commonly known as the Beauvais Missal. We only know about the inscription because it was recorded by Sotheby's in their catalog in 1926. The manuscript was the unfortunate victim of mid-20th-century biblioclasm, the breaking of books, and in the 1940s, single leaves began appearing on the market. The leaf illustrated in the catalog now belongs to the Cleveland Museum of Art, and dozens of leaves have been identified in collections around the world. Although the manuscript is broken and scattered, thanks to recent discoveries, we can now trace a direct path from 13th century Beauvais to 21st century North America. We know who wielded the knife. And with the development of sophisticated web-based technology, we can pick up the pieces of the Beauvais Missal. The Beauvais Missal is a beauty. Its numerous gilt initials with graceful, colorful tendrils extending into the margins easily recognizable. The manuscript measured 290 by 205 millimeters in 2 columns and is usually said to be written in pages of 21 lines, although there are actually 3 different layouts: the calendar with 1 month per page, the canon with 15 lines per page, and the missal itself with 21 lines per page or 10 staves of music. The style of the script and illumination suggests that the manuscript was produced towards the end of the 13th century. It was given to the Beauvais Cathedral by the canon Robert of Hangest in exchange for a promise that the priest would say a memorial mass for him every year on November 3rd. Archival documents record that the manuscript was given in 1356, the year Hangest died. The book remained in the library for 450 years, clearly identified in several library inventories. The cathedral library was dispersed, as were most French ecclesiastical collections during the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century. The Missal disappeared at that time, but surfaced again several decades later as part of the collection of Didier Petit de Meurville. In 1843, the Beauvais Missal, newly bound and gilt by Lyon binder Bruyère, was purchased by Henri-Auguste Brolman, a commercial broker in Lyon, from whom it passed through several generations to his great-granddaughter and heiress, Madame Etienne Mallet. She sold it at Sotheby's in May of 1926 for £970 to dealer William Permen. British scholar Peter Kidd recently discovered that Permen was acting as an agent for none other than William Randolph Hearst, who brought the manuscript to the United States. Hearst owned the manuscript for 16 years before selling it for $1,000 in October 1942 through a company called Gimbel Brothers in New York to Philip Duchnez, a New York book dealer. Duchnez was a notorious bookbreaker, counting among his friends and business associates Cleveland bibliophile Otto Egge. Egge spent most of his career as a professor of art history at the Cleveland Institute of Art. He was a collector of manuscripts, but he was also a book dealer. He is best known for breaking apart hundreds of manuscripts and early printed books in the 1930s and 40s, selling them leaf by leaf at a massive profit. He wasn't the first to do this, of course. Other dealers had figured out that economies of scale would work in their favor if they sold 250 leaves to 250 buyers instead of one manuscript to one buyer. Egge defended his biblioclasm proudly in this 1938 article in a hobbyist journal called Avocations. "Book terrors," he wrote, "have been cursed and condemned, but have they ever been praised or justified? Surely, to allow 1,000 people to have and to hold an original manuscript leaf and to get the thrill and understanding that comes only from actual and frequent contact with these art heritages is justification enough for the scattering of fragments. Few indeed can hope to own a complete manuscript book. Hundreds, however, may own a leaf," unquote. Well, his destructive and irreparable actions may have been misguided, but he was correct in one important respect. Small collections throughout the United States that could never have afforded to buy entire codices, entire bound books, are today the proud possessors of significant collections for teaching, collections of medieval manuscript leaves. Although Egge was certainly responsible for breaking hundreds of books and manuscripts, it appears to have been Duchnez who broke the Beauvais Missal. Less than a month after the Hearst sale, he began offering single pages for sale for $25 to $40 apiece, depending on the amount of gold decoration found on any particular leaf. Duchnez only needed to sell 40 of the cheap leaves to break even. With more than 300 leaves to offer, economies of scale were indeed working in his favor, and he stood to make an enormous profit, as bookbreakers often do. I recently found a piece of correspondence that suggests that Duchnez and Egge were actually in cahoots in planning the purchase and dismembering of the Beauvais Missal. In this letter to the librarian in Lima, Ohio, with whom Egge had a business partnership, Egge refers to, quote, 9 new items, the finest, Beauvais, France, 1285, will be sent shortly, unquote. This letter is dated 1 October 1942, several weeks before Duchnez bought and dismembered the manuscript. This suggests that he and Egge had decided in advance to buy and to break the Beauvais Missal. After removing the leaves he intended to offer for sale, Duchnez passed the remnants on to Egge, who distributed leaves through his usual means by gift or by sale. Shortly after his death in 1951, Egge's wife Louise followed through on a project he had begun, using the leaves of dozens of different manuscripts and early printed books, including the Beauvais Missal, to create thematic portfolios, many of which are still housed together, intact. In other words, she took one leaf from this manuscript, one leaf from that one leaf from a third, and piled them up into a deck of manuscript leaves, each of which was from a different manuscript. The most common of these portfolios are titled 50 Original Leaves from Medieval Manuscripts, Original Leaves from Famous Bibles, and Original Leaves from Famous Books. The leaves were taped into custom mats with a distinctive red fillet border and Egge's handwritten notes across the bottom, identified with Egge's letterpress label, and stored in custom buckram boxes. The leaves in these portfolios are always sequenced the same way. Number 5 in one portfolio comes from the same manuscript as number 5 in every other portfolio of the same name. By the same token, the Beauvais Missal leaves are always number 15 in the 50 Original Leaves of Medieval Manuscripts portfolio, 40 of which were assembled and marketed. Egge's portion of the manuscript, however, was still mostly intact and laid into the binding, if not still bound, in 1947, when he published this image illustrating an article about his collection. The remnants of the manuscript can still be seen in their binding in the upper left corner. On the left of the opening is the leaf we have already seen, given to the Cleveland Museum of Art in 1982 by Otto's daughter, Elizabeth. The leaf on the right has yet to be found. I first encountered Otto Egge and the Beauvais Missal as a graduate student at Yale in the early 1990s. I fell in love with the manuscript at the Beinecke Library and have been keeping track of its remnants ever since, as I've encountered them in publications and in my work, identifying, cataloging, and blogging about collections around the country. I currently know of 103 leaves scattered around the world in 26 states in the District of Columbia, as well as Canada, England, Japan, Norway, and Monaco. The 102nd leaf came to my attention just a few months ago, found by an estate appraiser in a trunk in Maine, and number 103 appeared in my inbox yesterday. In my quest to find these leaves, I have contacted librarians, scholars, dealers, and collectors worldwide, publicized the search on my blog, The Manuscript Road Trip, through Twitter and even Facebook. And I've driven more than 1,000 miles around the state of Ohio, where, because of Egge's local business dealings, there are 18 Beauvais Missal leaves, more than in any other state. As we zoom in on the East Coast, we will see that we have our fair share here as well. And in the Boston area, we are very fortunate to have 6 Beauvais Missal leaves in 3 collections, 2 at Wellesley College, 2 at Harvard, and 2 at the Boston Public Library. All 6 are displayed upstairs. This is more Beauvais Missal leaves than have ever been seen together since the manuscript was dismembered in 1942. This gathering aside, it is clear that the pieces of this Humpty Dumpty are far too scattered to ever be physically put back together again. Recent developments in digital imaging and linked data models make it possible, 74 years after it was cut up, to digitally reconstruct the Beauvais Missal. Working with a team of digital humanities programmers at the University of St. Louis through a project called Broken Books, I have begun work on a digital reconstruction of this beautiful and important manuscript. I've accumulated digital images and data for all of the known leaves of the Missal, except for the one that I learned about yesterday. And I've identified dozens of consecutive leaves in groups of 2, 3, 4, and up to as many as 8. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, we have to get a handle on the contents of the manuscript. It is, of course, a missal, that is, a prayer book for the use of a priest during Mass. Some of the leaves preserve liturgy from the temporale, that is, the movable feasts whose dates are set relative to Easter each year. Others preserve the sanctorale, a much more straightforward section that is organized according to the calendar of saints, or the commons, generic masses for particular classes of saints. A few leaves preserve the liturgical calendar that would have begun the book, and others preserve the canon of the Mass, and still others votive or auxiliary masses. So the first task upon encountering a new leaf is to determine its contents, what section, what feast, and the leaf's placement relative to other leaves from that feast that may also survive. The Sotheby's description, as well as older sales catalogs and inventories from Beauvais, consistently refer to this manuscript as the third part of a missal, tertia pars missalis. The early inventories and sources disagree as to whether the set was 3 or 4 volumes, but regardless, the surviving leaves support the contention that the missal was originally part of a larger set. All of the surviving temporale and sanctorale leaves fall between April and November. This then was a summer volume, containing masses from the week after Easter through the final summer Sunday after Pentecost, which occurred in late November. A complete mass in the manuscript gives the introit, psalm, collect, epistle, responsory, versicle, lesson, offertory, secret, communion, and post-communion, with some masses also including prefaces, sequences, or votive prayers. Musical pieces, introits, psalms, responsories, versicles, offertories, and communions are generally given in incipient form only, that is, the first few words. This makes sense because those pieces are for the choir to chant and would have been found in full in an accompanying gradual. The biblical readings, that is, the epistles and the lessons, are usually given in incipient form as well. This is very important, so keep it in mind for a few minutes. That leaves 3 genres of prayer given in full for the sake of the priest: the collect, the secret, and post-communion. In his online studies of the early history of the manuscript, Peter Kidd reproduces a Beauvais Cathedral Library inventory dated December 1464, in which a 4-volume missal is described in detail. Now that we know that the Beauvais Missal was a summer volume without biblical readings, it can be clearly identified in this inventory as item 126, the latter part of this same missal, where there are collected responsories and alleluias and offertories and collects, beginning on the first Sunday after Easter. The incipit of the second folio after the calendar is Angelus Domini, and the penultimate begins Te Domine Suppliciter. Neither of those leaves has yet come to light. A 17th century catalog transcribed by the French scholar Henri Aumont goes further in describing the volume as being without epistles and lessons, as it indeed is. A companion volume is described as providing those biblical readings. That lectionary and the other volumes of the set have never been identified. And so now we have some parameters within which to work. This is a missal for April through November, whose extant leaves fall into one of 6 sections: calendar, temporale, the canon, the sanctorale, the commons, and votive or auxiliary masses. For the most part, rubrics and textual evidence make identification of the masses on any particular leaf fairly straightforward. And for the temporale and sanctorale, the leaves need only be placed in calendrical order. Within the commons and the votive sections, however, the sequence of masses is not always so clear. Physical evidence can help resolve such ambiguities. It so happens that, as is often the case, the gold used in the Beauvais Missal has left numerous offsets, pale, sometimes barely discernible mirror images on facing pages. Here are 2 consecutive leaves, one owned by Rhodes College in Tennessee and the other by manuscript scholar Christopher de Hamel. And here's the offset, the original on the right, offset onto the leaf at the left, with a close-up so you can see more clearly what I'm referring to. This trace evidence proves the identity of facing pages whose surfaces were pressed tightly together during the hundreds of years the manuscript was mostly shut and stored. This material trace evidence is critical for the reconstruction of the manuscript. Also important is the rate of survival of the leaves and their distribution among the various sections of the manuscript. Now, only 1/3 of the manuscript has been located so far, and so these numbers must be taken with a grain of salt and an acknowledgement of the vagaries of manuscript survival. Even so, the emerging patterns do support certain hypotheses. 40% of the surviving leaves come from the sanctorale section. Now, that section may have been longer than the others or had more marketable initials per leaf than the music-filled commons, so that in itself is not particularly significant. However, when we look at the distribution of leaves within the sanctorale section itself, we find something interesting. Hardly any leaves have surfaced from the beginning and end of the sanctorale, and a very large number survive from the middle, July and August, to be exact. And if we parse the data even further, by looking at the sanctorale leaves known to be associated with Otto Egge, as opposed to Duchenez. That is, known to have been part or still part of an Egge portfolio, or known to have been sold or given by him, we find that they are all from July and August. This suggests that along with scattered leaves from other sections of the manuscript, Duchenez passed on to Egge entire chunks of the codex, perhaps complete quires from this central section. Now, in addition to virtually resequencing the leaves, a process in which each leaf must be broken down into constituent images of two sides, a pair of two-dimensional surfaces, I am also rebuilding the physical object itself in the virtual world, reconstructing the manuscript's codicological structure in order to retrieve the three-dimensional codex. Now, for those of you who are not students of manuscript studies, I'm going to give you a crash course in the construction of medieval manuscripts, a discipline known as codicology. Those of you who are manuscript scholars, you can take a moment to check your email. Like most medieval manuscripts, the Beauvais Missal is written on parchment, on animal skin, in this case probably sheepskin. Once it's prepared, which I'm not going to go into because it is a messy and disgusting process, the skin is trimmed into neat rectangles. But the basic building block of a medieval manuscript from a codicological perspective is not this flat rectangular sheet, but a unit of two attached leaves created when the rectangle of parchment is folded in half. Each unit is called a bifolium. Bifolia are nested in groups of 4 to 6 before writing and later stitched through the middle, creating a notebook of 8 to 12 leaves, usually, called a gathering or a quire. Once the quires are complete, they're stacked in order and sewn between boards to create the bound book. The biblioclast reverses the process, removing the quires from the binding, removing the sewing from the gutters, separating the bifolia from one another. But he doesn't stop there. The biblioclast must parse the manuscript even further, splitting the atom and dividing the bifolium into 2 leaves. As part of my work, I'm trying to reverse this final act by reconstructing formerly conjoined folia, like these 2 Beauvais Missal leaves. These 2 leaves, born together on a single piece of parchment more than 700 years ago, and now separated by several hundred miles, haven't seen one another since they were cut apart in 1942. The Beauvais Missal has no page numbers because that would be cheating. But it does have catchwords, which indicate the end of each gathering or quire. If a book has been properly assembled, the catchwords at the bottom of the last verso of one quire should match the first few words of the next quire. We can see this at work in this consecutive pair we looked at a few minutes ago, where the catchwords here at the bottom match the first words at the top there, indicating that the leaf on the left is the last of its quire, and by extension, the leaf on the right is the first of the next quire. Because this is a French manuscript, we can safely assume that it was primarily constructed in the French style, 8-leaf quires of 4 nested bifolia, known as quaternions. Combining the presence of catchwords with the assumption of a quaternion structure and clues in the Sotheby's description, I've been able to reconstruct one whole and several partial quires, as well as hypothesize the original structure of the manuscript. This means that I can start virtually reconstructing conjoint bifolia like these. It is in July and August of the Sanctorale, the section known to have been closely associated with Egge, where I've had the most success piecing quires back together. The largest set of consecutive leaves that I have found is a run of 8, 6 of which have a confirmed Egge provenance. These leaves run from the feast of the rededication of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem on July 15th through the invention of St. Stephen on August 3rd. The 7th leaf in the series from the State Library of New York in Albany has catchwords, so it must be the final leaf of its quire. Working backwards then, we actually have 7 of 8 leaves of this quire, with the first leaf still missing. a leaf that certainly included, at the very least, the missing portion of the feast of the rededication of the Holy Sepulchre. This is a fairly rare piece of liturgy, by the way, so I am eager to find this missing leaf. And now we can see quite clearly which pairs of leaves must have originally been conjoined. Or for those of you who prefer your codicology more realistic than schematic, here are 1, 2, 3, 4 bifolia composing the original gathering. So here's how this all comes together online. On my website, brokenbooks2.omeka.net, you will find images and metadata for all of the identified leaves, as well as preliminary and ongoing analyses of the recovered portion of the manuscript. You can search for liturgical keywords, such as saints' names or leaf location, by using the search box in the upper right corner. And you can explore several thematic exhibit spaces. From here, you can link to the reconstruction of the Beauvais Missal. Clicking this link opens the Mirador Manifest, which immediately begins pulling images into place, using persistent URLs that I've assigned to each position. The digital surrogate begins with calendar pages at the left and continues from left to right in manuscript order. Each image has metadata associated with it: a broken book's number, the leaf's location and shelf mark, a brief summary of its liturgical contents, and its first and last words. Metadata that can be accessed by clicking on the annotation bubble in the lower left corner. Clicking the bubble again closes the data window. From this main screen, you can scroll through all of the leaves in order using the arrows here or the film strip at the bottom. And when you see a leaf of interest, clicking on it brings it front and center. The drop-down table of contents menu at the upper left allows instant access to different sections of the manuscript, such as the calendar or the temporale and sanctorale, and so on. Clicking on the thumbnail view over at the right allows you to see all of the images at once, rather than encountering them one at a time. And then you can also switch to scroll view, and this allows the reader to encounter the manuscript as a true digital surrogate, reading it as it was intended to be read by openings, verso facing recto, instead of just single images, bringing the reader one step closer to the three-dimensional object. When you see a leaf of interest, clicking on it takes you back to the main screen where you can bring up the metadata. You also have the option of opening multiple viewing windows. By clicking up here, you can open, say, 2 windows. There's the first. Click here to add another leaf, and then you can start comparing leaves side by side, should you wish. The fully customizable and modular backend undergirding the Broken Books platform makes it very easy to add new leaves and to reorder them if necessary. And the data model is detailed and flexible. There are quite a lot of fields that I haven't yet filled in. The application is still being tweaked, but once it's fully functional and bug-free, there are plans in place to experiment with it in the classroom. For example, I'll be using it in my class at the Simmons School of Library and Information Science, tasking my medieval manuscript students with reconstructing one of the manuscripts that Eggy dismembered. A project like this is the perfect use for digital technology, as digital stitching is really the only way to repair these broken and scattered manuscripts. But in digital humanities, it isn't enough to do something just because you can and because it seems really cool. There has to be a so what. What can we actually learn from the reconstructed manuscript that we didn't already know? First, the Illustrative Program. By Sotheby's count, there were originally 4 historiated initials, 35 large initials, and a very large number of smaller initials, all in golden colors. 3 of the historiated initials are extant. 2 on the leaf at the Cleveland Museum of Art, on the left, and the other on a leaf belonging to the Allen Art Gallery at Oberlin College. These historiated initials illustrate the canon: 2 images of a priest saying Mass at the top, And at the bottom are metaphorical images of two women representing the new law, ecclesia, and the old, synagoga. There are hundreds of extant 2- or 3-line initials, most of which include these distinctive spiky extensions into the margins. Of the 35 quote-unquote large initials, a fair number do survive. Of course, the term large is subjective, but since most of the initials in the manuscript are 2 lines high, it stands to reason that anything more than 2 or 3 lines in height was probably considered large. In the recovered part of the Sanctorale, these large initials begin the masses for John the Baptist, the octave of Saints Peter and Paul, Mary Magdalene, and, still somewhat inexplicably, the 7 martyred brothers. Large initials such as these are also found at the beginning of each common Mass and the introit of votive and special Masses. The artist seems to take particular pleasure in enlarging and elaborating every initial I he painted. It is possible that some of these, which can range up to 15 or 16 lines in height, are counted among the 35. You'll see the beautiful tree on the right upstairs on a leaf that belongs to Wellesley College. Here you can see in greater detail the artist's playfulness and creativity with zoomorphs and his skill for camouflage and detail. Reconstructing the manuscript also, of course, allows us to methodically examine its liturgical contents. The 6 leaves upstairs are a fairly representative selection from different parts of the Missal, so we will meet them all as we make our way through the manuscript. First, the calendar. There are only 2 known calendar leaves, one sold at Sotheby's in 1985 and now lost, although I've just gotten a lead on where it might be, and the other at Harvard displayed upstairs. The leaf sold at Sotheby's preserved February on the recto and March on the verso, while the Harvard leaf preserves August and September. Among the saints listed in these 2 leaves are several of regional importance, such as Ansbertus of Rouen, Desiderius of Vienne, Arnulf of Metz, and the abbot Philibertus. All are consistent with Beauvais and Augustinian use. The surviving leaves also include a fairly common set of what are called Egyptian day verses, identifying advantageous and disadvantageous days of each month. This set of verses is particularly popular in England, but it is not unknown in France. The temporale holds no surprises, the surviving leaves ranging as expected from the week after Easter through the 28th Sunday after Pentecost. 2 of the exhibited leaves come from this section. Boston Public Library on the left preserves the 2nd and 3rd Sundays after Easter, while this other leaf from Wellesley preserves the liturgy for Pentecost Sunday. This leaf, belonging to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., was recently brought to my attention, again by the very industrious Peter Kidd. It turns out to be an extremely important piece of the puzzle, as it gives the Mass for the final summer Sunday after Pentecost, representing, therefore, the final leaf of the temporale section. But at the end of the Mass, the text proceeds directly into prayers said by the priest while donning his vestments, prayers that commence the next section of the manuscript, the canon, the general prayers of the Mass. Until this leaf came to light, I wasn't certain where the canon section fit into the manuscript. Thanks to this leaf, I now know for sure. Leaves in the canon section have only 15 lines per page instead of 21. This is the only section of the manuscript not represented in the exhibition upstairs, so we'll look instead at this leaf from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Most of the canon leaves preserve marginal instructions to the priest, telling the celebrant how to handle the host, what to do with the chalice, when to kneel, and so on. These instructions provide extensive, important, and fascinating evidence of the choreography of the Mass in the 13th century. For example, this annotation reads, "Lift up the host and show it to the people, then cover the platter and extend the chalice with 2 hands." The canon section is also where we find 3 of the 4 extant historiated initials in the preface of the Mass. One historiated initial is still missing, probably a crucifixion scene within a large T for Te Igitur, as in this early 14th century missal from Cologne. The next section of the manuscript preserves the liturgy honoring the saints in calendrical order, beginning at the end of November, corresponding with the first week of Advent. This leaf from the Boston Public Library preserves masses for saints commemorated at the end of August, from St. John the Baptist on August 29th through St. Priscus on September 1st. In terms of telling us something about the liturgical and hagiographic practice codified in the Beauvais Missal, the Sanctorale is going to be of greater use than the Temporale or the Commons. In particular, we want to look for saints commemorated with atypical masses, those that break the pattern. As I demonstrated a few minutes ago, in this manuscript, only 3 genres of prayer are typically given in full in a Mass: the Collect, the Secret, and the Post-Communion. The remaining musical pieces and biblical readings are usually given in incipient only, the complete texts having been recorded in an accompanying gradual and lectionary respectively. But there are exceptions in the Sanctorale, Masses with complete music or lessons, or that include atypical genres, such as prefaces and prosas. For the most part, however, these exceptions offer no great surprises and correspond with the Masses that begin with enlarged initials, that is, Masses for Apostles, Marian feasts, the Archangel Michael, and Mary Magdalene, shown here. In addition, there are 3 noteworthy extended Masses: the 7 Martyred Brothers on July 10th, the rededication of the Holy Sepulchre on July 15th, and the Feast of St. Augustine on August 15th. Remember, the manuscript was originally made for the use of an Augustinian canon. Also included, although not expanded, are local favorites Arnulfus Ebrulfus, the Bishop of Beauvais, Gaugericus, Firminus, Seraphia, and Nicomedes. All of these are consistent with the Beauvais and Augustinian origins of the manuscript. Next comes the Commons section, generic masses for different classes of saints, such as virgins or martyrs, to be used for masses without a proper liturgy. Leaves from the Commons are easily recognizable by their format and content. In this Harvard leaf on the left, for example, from the Common of Virgins, we find music for the choir given in full and multiple examples of each genre of prayer, that is, several introits or responsories or offertories or communions in a row. The 6th leaf in our exhibited series from Wellesley College preserves liturgy for the Common of Martyrs, beginning with the beautiful additional I to open the introit. The manuscript ends with special masses, the expected texts for travelers, weddings, and so on, and likely concluded with masses for the dead. Although I have made significant progress to date, and the digital surrogate is up and running, this project is really still just getting started. In addition to fleshing out the metadata and continuing my codicological and textual analyses, I'm ever hopeful that more leaves will come to light. Those of you who know me know what an optimist I am. There are still more than 200 unaccounted for. The online model ensures that additions can be easily made and the leaves can be reorganized if and when necessary. The Beauvais Missal is a testament to what is lost when a manuscript is dismembered and its leaves scattered. But it is also a hopeful case study in the promise of what is being called digital fragmentology. This virtual reconstruction allows us to reconstitute at least a facsimile of what has been lost, to study the illustration and contents of the dismembered codex in context. But we should never lose sight of the ultimate essential reality. This was a book, meant to be read and leafed and touched and smelled and cherished. We cannot recover the original object, but we can give it a new digital life. In the case of the Beauvais Missal, that is the best we can do. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions, if anyone has any. Yeah, Mary Jo?
Is there someplace on the website where you can click if you know where there's a leaf?
I did include a link to that's a direct email to me with a plea. Here are the dimensions, it's this many lines, here's what it looks like, please email me, which is how I found out about the one in Monaco. I got an email from a collector saying, I think I have 3 of them, and he did.
So you can translate the last
No, I haven't, in part because most of these texts are readily available online in English. I haven't actually been doing that. That's not...
It's not necessary for you to figure.
No, because I read Latin, so I can make sense out of the text. It's fairly clear when two leaves belong together or when they don't. And most of these Latin texts are available online, which is a lot of the research that I do is using online resources to identify the different pieces of the liturgy.
Is there anything similar to this being done with other manuscripts and visually reconstructing them?
Yeah, so the Broken Books project, the woman who runs that, for which my project is a case study, her name is Deborah Cashin, and she's working on a really spectacular manuscript called the Languedoc Breviary. And then I've got my students working on a few manuscripts. My students at Simmons last year worked on one of the Eggy manuscripts and made some really exciting discoveries about it. And I've just set this year's students to work on a different Eggy manuscript. There are so many of them that there's a lot of work to be done. And now that more people are hearing and more of these manuscripts are being available, more of the images are being available online, more and more people are beginning to do this kind of work. And there's so much work to be done that there's plenty of room for everybody to jump in the sandbox. I was actually at a conference just last week at Yale about Eggy, where there were several people who were working on different aspects of trying to reconstitute the manuscripts that he had dismantled. Yes? Yeah.
Can you comment or share any information about the artists who did this, the materials they used, and where those motifs originated?
Sure. So the little beasts and the birds and the dogs and the puppies, in the case of this manuscript, have no special significance. They're really just for fun. They're really just the artist being playful. Sometimes the beasts in the margins do have significance, but sometimes a dragon is just a dragon. And that's certainly the case in the Beauvais Missal. I have yet to find an example of one of these animals in the initials that actually has a symbolic significance. The paint is, I don't know, Lillian, do you want to answer this question? It's a tempera, right, for the most part. Yeah.
Mostly they used pigment and egg white and gum.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the pigment would determine the color.
Right, and the pigments can be mineral, they may be herbal, plant-based. There are a lot of different, all the artists have their own little secret recipes, and there are manuscripts that describe how different colors were mixed and how the ink was made, and how the gold was applied as well. Everyone has their own, a lot of the artists have their own secrets that they didn't like to give away.
The mask is in progress as secret. I never heard of that before. What is that?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't actually know what the different. I'm not Catholic, so I don't actually know the function of some of the other things. I don't know if there's anyone here who can explain liturgically what that is. I don't actually know.
What is the question?
What the secret is. What part of the Mass that is. I know the sequence of the pieces, but I don't actually know liturgically what it signifies.
It's been removed, whatever.
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
It's
No
not
longer.
anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just a reading.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a reading, I believe.
Yeah. Whispered. I mean, I think it is actually something that was done. That was a private piece of liturgy that the priest would say. I believe. Anyone else? Yeah.
Do you think that all of these were Eggy manuscripts were in practice, or do you think that the ones that were less decorative weren't?
We don't actually know. Yeah, so sorry. So the question was whether it's likely that Eggy actually distributed all of the leaves of any given manuscript or not. He certainly would only have sold those that had more commercial value, that is, those that had initials or gold on them. But he also gave a lot of them away. And it may very well be that some of them were damaged or and discarded. We really don't know because he didn't keep very detailed records. However, the reason that I was at Yale was because Yale has just acquired I guess it's been a year now, Eggy's personal archive and his personal collection of medieval manuscripts that was in a vault in New Jersey for 50 years. And his family just sold it to Yale, and it is full of unbelievably exciting things like the carcasses of some of the manuscripts. So the binding with a bunch of some of the leaves still intact, not of the Beauvais Missal, unfortunately. I had wished, but no such luck. But several manuscripts that I know from other contexts, we found their remnants in boxes at Yale. I was allowed to come and spend a day digging around through the archive to see what was there. It's not available. It's not open to researchers technically yet because they haven't finished processing it. But there's a lot of material there, and I think as we make our way through it, it will lead to some conclusions about what he did and how. And there's also a lot of documentary records there, boxes and boxes of financial records to be gone through that hopefully will help us to answer some of those questions. Yeah, in the back.
Sorry if I missed this, but do we know how he came upon this missal?
Yeah, so I mentioned that at the beginning. It was purchased by his business partner, Philip Duchenez in New York, who cut it up and started selling off pages, and then he passed chunks of it on to Eggy for him to do with as he wished.
Just curious, are you aware that many of this biblioclasm that still occurs today, and along with that, would there be laws that deter people or prevent people from doing this outside of the shaming that go on?
Yeah, right. So the question is whether biblioclasm still goes on today. I'm sorry to say it does. With fairly consistent regularity, you'll see a manuscript, say, sold at Christie's, and then 3 weeks later, leaves will begin to appear on eBay. It happens all the time, and it is frowned upon. It is not illegal, but it is frowned upon. And in the United States, a dealer who did that would lose their accreditation from the Antiquarian Booksellers Association. So there certainly is pressure in the United States to prevent it from happening, but it happens in Europe all the time. It's awful. And there are dealers in the United States who sell single leaves. There's a huge market for them. They're really affordable. They're relatively inexpensive. As Aggie said, who can afford to buy an entire manuscript? But pretty much anybody can afford to buy a leaf. And that's true. And so there is a really big market for these things. But like ivory, most dealers have a statement on their catalog or in their shop that says, "We didn't break it, it came to us that way." But who knows? There's no way to know. Yeah.
Could you just tell us a little more detail about how it would have been used at the cathedral itself? Would the
Sure.
priests be using it daily, Sunday?
Sure. So the question is about how the missal is used. So Mass is said every day after terce, so around 11 in the morning. So there are several different kinds of books that a priest would need in order to get through the required liturgy for the day. So there are the offices that take place throughout the day, and then the Mass. So some books are for use during the offices. Those are that's called a breviary, the priest's book for the office. A priest's book for Mass that has liturgy and texts for the Mass is called a missal. And then the choir also had its own books. An antiphonal is a choir book for the office, and a gradual is a choir book for the Mass. So at any particular time of day, you would go and fetch whatever book you needed for that moment of the day. And the liturgy is specific to the day, depending on what saint is being commemorated on that day. So you would flip through your book until you found the page that you needed for that day, whether it was for a saint or for one of the movable feasts that are set relative to Easter. Does that answer your question?
Would there be evidence that the Beauvais Missal was used on a regular basis? Can you tell by its condition? Or
Well,
it
it's...
was given by somebody who could have been an honorary.
Yeah, so the question is whether there are signs of use. Unfortunately, because it's been cut up and matted and trimmed and framed and unframed and scotch taped and glued and had all sorts of terrible things happening to it, it's very difficult to determine signs of contemporary 13th century use versus later use or modern use. If it were a complete codex, it would be easier to determine signs of particular use that were contemporary. The annotations certainly suggest that it was being used. And there are, in fact, some annotations that are late medieval, 14th and 15th century notes in the margins that certainly suggest it was actually being used at the cathedral all through the centuries. Any other questions? Am I missing a hand? Oh.
Pretty sure maybe I missed Lisa. So this was the periscope part, the third part.
Yeah.
Did you mention was it known what happened to the other parts at all? Was it
I'm looking for them, but no. As far as I know, no one has ever identified them. And the manuscripts from Beauvais, many of them ended up at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. But from the scouring that I've done of their website and their published catalogs, I haven't found anything that could be any of the volumes of the set.
17th century or the 16th century inventory?
Yeah.
The other volumes?
It did, yeah. Yeah, it did. And so we know what their content should have been. But as far as I know, they have not come to light.
Some of these would have gotten the complete third part, from what you can tell in the description. I'm thinking of...
Yes.
Okay, because Otto Egerton's first principle there, if we were reading along with his defense, is to say not to break up a complete...
Right, of course. That's a pretty big loophole.
Right.
You know, that modern dealers will say, well, it was missing 3 leaves at the beginning, so it was already imperfect. So, you know.
Missing 3 other parts of a 4-part.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's true. Yeah. Right. Right, but it does appear, based on the Sotheby's description, that it was complete in itself. That it wasn't already in shambles. And certainly some of the manuscripts he bought were already, we know from other evidence, they were already in shambles. So he certainly felt he was justified in breaking them up even further. But I don't think that was the case with the Beauvais Missal.
It looked like there was something in that one letter that you were quoting that indicated something about it.
Yes, that's right. There's a little parenthetical afterwards where he says it's from an incomplete book. But that, it was incomplete because Duchesne's, was going to have his way with it too. So, there's still a lot we don't know. And there's a lot of, I'll just throw this out there. The Lima Public Library in Ohio is ground zero for Otto Ege, which is really weird because he's from Cleveland. But he had this business relationship with this little public library. I don't know, has anybody ever heard of Lima? It is in the middle of nowhere. No offense to any Ohioans in the room, but it is farm country. It's halfway between Cincinnati and Toledo, and it is literally the middle of nowhere. I have been there, trust me, I know. And it has, they embarked on this business relationship with Ege where they would sell leaves as his agent at the public library in Lima and take part of the proceeds for their staff retirement fund. And they did this for 30 years. They sold hundreds and hundreds of leaves, and they still have 200 leaves of medieval manuscripts at the Lima Public Library, in addition to 3 banker boxes full of correspondence relating to this business relationship. And when I went to Lima to look at their Beauvais Missal leaf, because of course they have one, and I had no idea what I was going to find. I had scheduled my life. I have to be in Toledo at 3, so I'm going to just stop in Lima, zip in, take my pictures, and zip out. And I ended up staying for 6 hours because there was so much material. And here's the postscript. At this Otto Egge event at Yale last week, I met a man who's now a retired professor, chemistry professor at Yale, who grew up in Lima and as a teenager worked in the library and remembered really clearly all of these manuscript leaves. He and his brothers have a dozen of them, which he brought to the symposium and just sort of laid out on the table for all of us. And we were all like, oh, I know that manuscript, and oh, wait, there's that one, and there's that one. And he told me that all of his buddies in Lima have medieval manuscripts hanging on their walls because everyone in Lima was buying these things. So now I'm starting this scheme with another manuscript scholar. We're going to go out to Lima and do like an antique roadshow and start knocking on doors and see what we find out there. It's like this treasure trove hiding in farm country. So stay tuned. So hopefully you'll hear more about that at some point. Do you have another question?
Yeah, did how manuscripts affected, or is it obvious by the invention of printing press? Did that cease to encourage the
Indeed.
manuscripts?
So the question is about the transition from manuscript to printing in the mid to late 15th century. If you go to the exhibit at the Gardner, that's kind of the whole point of that piece of the exhibition, is to look at this transition. And it had a huge impact because manuscripts begin to be supplanted once printing becomes cheaper and plentiful. Parchment sort of starts to go out of style as paper becomes cheap and plentiful. And we get, and then you get this kind of mushy transitional zone where printed books are being illustrated by hand and manuscripts start to be written as if they're imitating printed books. So all through the late 15th and into the 16th century, you have kind of this transitional zone. And production of manuscripts definitely drops off. We're in a similar transition now. The transition from manuscript to printing is very much analogous to the transition we're living in now as digital reading and digital books begin. People keep talking about the death of the book, which I don't believe is coming. But you hear a lot of alarms about that, and you heard that when printing. People thought, oh my God, this is the end of everything. God forbid the people should be able to buy a book. Books are supposed to be for rich people, not for everybody. And we're living through a similar time now. This is, I think, one reason why the exhibition is so timely, because you will see that as you make your way through the 3 parts of the exhibition. You'll see that development, the rise of manuscript culture, and then the transition to printing. Just one more, maybe?
Oh, sure.
Are we done? Yeah, one more question? Anybody? We're tapped out.
No, you got
All
one
right.
more.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
Continuing that thought, is any particular work being done to ensure an archival presence of this compendium that you're making digitally?
Of this?
Yes.
Well, only, you mean in terms of like tape backup?
In terms of ensuring that the data
Yeah.
and the programs will actually be usable
Yeah.
10, 50, 100 years from now.
So the good thing about me working with the University of St. Louis Center for Digital Humanities is that that's their problem, not my problem. They have designed this. They're working in what's called Mirador, which is IIIF compatible. It's all the sort of latest digital practices, open access, sustainable, and designed to last. Of course, we don't know what the internet's going to look like 10 years from now. All you can do is follow digital best practices, which again, is about open access. It's about high quality imaging. It's about a sustainable data model that respects authorities for the librarians in the room. And it's about backup, and the backup is certainly being undertaken by the folks at the university. So they're in charge of that piece, which I'm very happy to hand over to them. That's your tax dollars at work, because it's a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, so thank you.
Yeah, better that you started this project in the last few years than maybe 20 years ago.
Oh, it couldn't have been done. Okay,
Well,
I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
One more thing, and then I'll stop, I promise. I did my doctoral thesis 1,000,000 years ago on a dismembered manuscript that I put back together, but I did it with black and white photocopies on the floor of my living room, cutting and pasting and gluing. And that was how I put that manuscript back together. And because it was mostly at Yale, they now want to do a digital version. They want to take that work that I did and actually do it in color and something along these lines. We're able to do things now. There's no way we could even have imagined 20, 30 years ago. I mean, I'm like living the dream here. This is, it's amazing. It is so thrilling to be able to see this, something that I've been kind of dreaming about in my head for years and years, to actually see it come to fruition. It's really thrilling.
Good.
Thank you all so much.